Welcome to the weekly update. It's October 8. I'm Robert Barwick. Today we're going to discuss three items. 1, the Aussie dollar. 2, Tony Abbott's flight to serfdom. And 3, saving the Murray Darling Basin from the greenies. First, the Australian dollar. You've probably noticed no one's interested in the Commonwealth Games. That contest is being overshadowed by something that seems much more interesting. Will the Australian dollar hit parity with the United States dollar? It's being regarded as some kind of national accomplishment if it does. Everyone's going to go on an international holiday, apparently. Okay, let's look at it realistically. Our dollar is not so much going up. It's partly going up. The real issue is the US dollar is going down. The US dollar is in free fall. It's the only way it can go thanks to the huge amount of money that has been printed and is continuing to be printed in the United States by the US Federal Reserve. That's what happens. The dollar is being hyperinflated. Now, this has international consequences all around the world. We saw an interesting event this week with the Reserve Bank's decision on interest rates. When they didn't raise interest rates, as everybody expected they would. All the economic experts were predicting the Reserve would raise interest rates because the economic experts were basing their analysis on the traditional rules governing the Reserve Bank. What they weren't factoring in is what the Reserve was factoring in, which is the parlous state of the world financial system. So the Reserve Bank of Australia didn't raise interest rates because they knew that it would cause a crisis on two levels. One, in Australia, it would blow out or contribute to blowing out the housing market. It may not be the final straw that breaks the camel's back, but it's adding pressure. What I mean by that is the pressure that would put on mortgage holders would drive a whole bunch more of them off the edge. They would be forced into default. And at a certain point, this would, if it continues like this, it would collapse the property market as we've witnessed in the United States. The Reserve Bank is acutely aware of that. Secondly, though, and this has shown up in the Reserve's coordination of its decision with other central banks like the Bank of Japan, the Reserve is in line with the international decision to pump more money into the financial system, to hyperinflate the world financial system as a way of bailing out all the unpayable debts and derivatives obligations of the banks. They're calling it quantitative easing 2. The US Federal Reserve has announced it, but all central banks are in on it. They're coordinating their activities and they're manning the pumps. And so for the Reserve to raise interest rates, it would have actually been tightening money emissions, and that's the last thing they want to do at the moment. They've made a decision they're going to hyperinflate us out of this economic crisis. Well, the Germans tried that. Good luck, we know where it's heading. So I just want to point out to the average pundit out there who watches the nightly news and sees all this breathless excitement about the Aussie dollar going up. The thing to understand is when you witness these massive fluctuations in financial markets, whether it be the currency markets or whether it be stock markets, and every time the markets rise up, there's excitement, but every time they fall down, there's panic. Don't go along for the ride. Get off the roller coaster. When the fluctuations are that wild, run. There's something wrong. Okay. Second, Tony Abbott's flight to serfdom. All right, I'm not going to buy into the soap opera about whether Tony Abbott should have stopped in Afghanistan to visit the troops. That's not the point. Forget that charade. Don't be distracted by that. The real issue is where Tony Abbott went instead. He attended the Conservative Party's conference in Great Britain and was there in time to listen to the speech given by British Prime Minister David Cameron on his vision for what's called the Big Society. Now, what this is PR for a plan for brutal austerity of the British people in the form of dismantling the social infrastructure of Great Britain and the nation-state institutions that hold Great Britain together. I'll quote the General Secretary of Unison in Britain, which represents public sector workers. He told the Guardian newspaper there a few months ago, he said, quote, "Make no mistake, this plan is all about saving money and it will cost even more jobs and lead to more service cuts. The government is simply washing its hands of providing decent public services and using volunteers as a cut price alternative." End quote. The specifics are, in the name of this big society, Cameron says he wants to empower local communities to take charge, again, of the services that have traditionally been the domain of the government. The government delivers these services to make sure that people have them, because it's the government that can muster the resources to provide the services in the first place. And David Cameron's saying, we want the local communities to feel empowered to deliver these services themselves. And like I said, it's dismantling the social infrastructure of Great Britain. It's couched in touchy feel-good language, but Dave Prentice nailed it for what it is. It's even worse than what you can imagine, though. This is an idea that is specifically influenced by a think tank in Britain called Demos, which is a spin-off of the Fabian Society, and it's the brainchild of a theology professor of all things named Philip Blond, and it's entirely inspired by the function of society in the days of serfdom, in the days of feudalism, i.e. the medieval era. Mr. Blond hates the emergence of the nation-state beginning in the 14th century with the King Louis XI of France. He attacks it as an autocratic imposition on this quaint little function of society in feudal times, and he specifically says in a September 2008 article entitled Medieval Thinking, quote, "Updating and recovering this earlier medieval model for the modern age is, of course, the task." So this is an ideology to destroy the nation-state and erect a return to feudalism. It's an ideology that is not new in modern times. It influenced Mussolini's fascism in Italy. It influenced fascist thinkers in Britain in the 19th century. It's just that most people would not assume when they're being told that their services are being cut, that they're being cut by ideologues who worship the days of feudalism and serfdom. So that's what Abbott's gone over to Great Britain to be inspired about. But here's the funny bit. The Demos think tank, which produced this policy, also has another follower, and that follower is Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Gillard has said that her most trusted advisor is a man named Tony Bentley. Well, Tony Bentley is currently on the board of a think tank in Australia called Per Capita, which is another Fabian spin-off. But he was executive director of this Demos think tank for 8 years. Now, Demos, don't be surprised that Abbott and Gillard are both find themselves under the influence of Demos. This is what Demos does in Britain. Demos was the advisor to Tony Blair, and now they've become the advisor to David Cameron. That's how these think tanks work. Democracy means nothing in terms of the behind-the-scenes functioning of the governments. So we're witnessing the emergence of a situation where it's as if Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard, who I should point out, are both POMs. If they were patriotic Australians, I wouldn't hold that against them, but they're selling us down the river, so I am holding against them. They're both POMs. They see themselves as wannabe the lord and lady of the vassal state of Australia in some world feudalistic empire. So be warned. And finally, the news of the day, it hasn't quite been released yet. It's scheduled for release today. The Murray Darling Commission report is to be handed down. This has caused a lot of concern among the farming communities of the Murray-Darling as it should. This is another nail in the coffin of industrial Australia. This is our food bowl, and they are preparing to dismantle it savagely with cuts to irrigation of mooted to be 37% and in some places 43%. Today, Craig Isherwood, the Citizens Electoral Council leader, has put out a statement about this. I'll just read you some of it. The statement is entitled, "Murray-Darling Shutdown Interferes with Nature, Who Benefits?" The mooted goal of making the Murray River flow out to sea every year, including during drought years, by slashing irrigation in the Murray-Darling Basin by up to 37%, is an interference with nature to kill off people, CEC leader Craig Isherwood declared today. The greenies, quote, "The greenies are keen to mess with nature to annihilate people. I say let's improve nature to benefit people." And Craig went on to explain that it's not natural for the Murray River to flow out to sea every year. The Murray, all through the history of the Murray River, it regularly dries up and then it starts flowing again after big rains. And this has happened during European settlement, well before the irrigation infrastructure was built up. So to make the river behave in this way, according to this greenie ideal, is interfering with it. What Craig has called for, when he's called for improving nature, is the establishment or the construction of the Clarence River scheme in northeastern New South Wales. The Clarence River is a big river, but it's a short river that flows out to sea. That river could be diverted over the Great Dividing Range into the headwaters of the Darling River and keep the river basically permanently flowing for everybody, for irrigators, for the lower lakes, for the city of Adelaide down the bottom, etc. That would be a creative solution to this problem, but a solution which you would only implement if you cared about the real future of Australia and weren't driven by ideology to depopulate Australia, as the Wentworth Group, which is a front for the World Wildlife Fund, and the main group that has come up with this policy of destroying the Murray-Darling Basin. They are committed to depopulating Australia. If you're not, you would instead go with alternative ideas like the Clarence River scheme. So stay tuned for more details on that. But that's it for today's report. Thanks for joining in. See you next week.